I'd like to talk today about marriage. As you may know, marriage is suffering in this pandemic for reasons that are not hard to discern. The pandemic has caused economic challenges, and those always are a stress on marriage. Children are staying home for those families with younger children, and that adds stress to a marriage. There was a report in The Economist magazine recently about 5 big cities that indicated that while most forms of crime have declined during this pandemic, reports of domestic violence have gone up. And there's a fear that in the wake of this pandemic, divorces are going to increase. But I think we need to be clear about this. The pandemic is really not the cause of marital discord. It rather exposes the discord that has been there all along. It's like, I hope this analogy is not too revolting to you. It's like being in a roach-riddled inner city apartment, and you turn on the lights and all of a sudden the roaches all scramble. And I think the pandemic has revealed some of these cracks that have been present in marriage all along. Let me just talk about one of those, actually. One of the roaches of marriage that is revealed by the pandemic, and it's something that sociologists call the soulmate model of marriage. Let me read you a definition of that model. This is a deficient model of marriage when compared to the biblical model of marriage. So Bradford Wilcox is the director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, and he defines the soulmate model of marriage like this. He says it took root in the 1970s. It rests on the idea that wedlock is primarily about an intense emotional or romantic connection between two people that should last only as long as that connection remains happy, fulfilling, and life-giving to the self. And of course, that's the view of marriage that is so prevalent in our popular culture. How many Hollywood movies are centered on that? How many popular songs have that as their theme? And it's a deficient model of marriage. It cannot stand up under the stress of a pandemic in many cases. So, is there an alternative? Well, of course there is, and it's the biblical model of marriage. And one of the things I am hopeful for our own congregation is that God is going to use this pandemic in positive ways, including to be a blessing for marriages in the church. Perhaps deepening a biblical sense of marriage, which is summarized very well in those verses from Ephesians 5. I'll just read you 2 verses. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So that's a view of marriage that is resilient, that will last. Again, I like to, this is an illustration from my sermon 2 days ago, to see life as a corn maze cut in a field. And, in a maze, every path leads to a dead end except one. And those paths, though, look promising initially until you get to the end. And I think soulmate marriage is one of those dead end paths. But there's another path that leads to life and satisfaction and happy marriage. And it's the biblical view. It's the path that, essentially, to summarize Ephesians 5, Jesus is saying to husbands and wives, follow me. That's what you need to do. Follow me in your marriage. Wives, if you're following me in your marriage, you're going to be willing to humble yourself and submit to your husbands. Husbands, if you're following me in your marriage, you're going to be willing to lay down your lives sacrificially for your wives, for your children. It's taking up a cross and following Jesus. And that view of marriage leads to happiness. Those are the happiest marriages. And I pray for the marriages of our church that they're going to be deepened in this direction during this pandemic. Leaving the soulmate view and embracing the biblical view of covenant marriage, following Christ, showing the love of Jesus for his people in the quality of our marriages. May God bless your marriage to that end.